Look, we all know Skyrim is an epic game. It's been out for over 6 years, and most people watching this video will probably own at least 2 copies of it already. Hell, it's been released on more platforms than I can keep count of, so perhaps you're wondering why the hell you should bother buying it all over again, but this time for the PlayStation VR. Well, my fellow adventurers, like you, I used to be a bit of a skeptic, but that was before I took a virtual arrow to the knee. So join me now as I regale you with 9 ways Skyrim VR blew my tiny little mind. Part of the fun of vanilla Skyrim was going on adventures, looting treasure chests, and finding awesome new weapons to play with. While you can have a look at these new weapons in your inventory, there's no better way to admire them than in Skyrim VR, where you can use your PlayStation Move controllers to check out every single detail at close range. I mean, just being able to dual-wield 2 enchanted axes at once is an epic experience, but being able to turn them around and appreciate them from all angles is something that brings untold amounts of realism to the virtual world. Dogs are awesome, but in vanilla Skyrim, you can't show them very much affection. Thanks to PSVR's head tracking and move controllers though, you can get right down into this good boy's face and give him a good scratch under the chin and on his head and behind his ear and everywhere else a wonderful woofer like this deserves. Unfortunately, you still have to rely a lot on your imagination here because the dog doesn't react to it at all and the controller just drifts through him. But VR does give you an incredible sense of presence, and when you're this close to an avatar, your brain gets tricked into thinking it's an actual, real-life living being. Honestly, you can almost smell the dog food on his breath, the good boy. Unless you're a cartographer, maps normally won't excite you that much. The map in vanilla Skyrim is pretty cool though, because it allows you to examine this immense land from above, and it helps you understand just how truly huge it all is. In PSVR, that experience is increased tenfold, because now, instead of just moving the map around, you kind of soar above it like a dragon in flight. It allows you to plan your routes a little bit better, and it gives you a much better lay of the land. Basically speaking, in vanilla Skyrim, you're looking at a lovely 3D map, but in Skyrim VR, you're watching over a fantasy realm like some kind of omnipotent god. Riding a horse in vanilla Skyrim is fine. It gets you where you want to go slightly faster than you normally would, and you can often gallop past some of the smaller, more pesky enemies without having to waste time chopping them into bits. In VR though, riding through the land of Skyrim is much more of a spectacle. You can feel the height of the horse as you trot along, looking down at the people you're riding past, and there's something magnificent about sitting in the saddle and just watching the world go by. The head tracking means you can look around and behind yourself, or even lean down to give the horse a reassuring pat on the cheek, and all this makes it incredibly easy to roleplay being on an actual horse riding trek through a medieval world. Honestly, it might not sound like much, but if you tried it out for yourself, you'd find that VR turns a slightly mundane form of transport into something rather special. Giddy up, hoss! Hiya! Look, I didn't want to get into a fight with a giant. I was happy just standing there admiring how tall it was, but then bloody Lydia waded in with her sword drawn and made one of them murder my horse Bojack. Couldn't really back down then, could I? Still, at least it's a nice view from up here. Experiencing death by giant in VR really is quite something, let me tell you. I suffer from acrophobia, otherwise known as the fear of heights. That fear has stopped me from doing many fun things in the real world, like bungee jumping and skydiving, mainly because I don't want to end up as a pile of Ian-shaped jam on the pavement. But thanks to Skyrim VR, I'm able to face those fears head on without the prospect of my imminent death to worry about. The thing with VR that doesn't come across in 2D is the sense of scale and distance. For instance, in 2D, the view from the top of this waterfall doesn't look too scary. VR, however, creates an illusion of depth, and along with the 3D audio of the water cascading down the falls, the sight I was confronted with in VR was a lot more intimidating. Just standing there looking over the edge gave me a familiar feeling of anxiety in my chest, which is why it took me a couple of goes to work up the courage to throw myself off. Oh, turns out death isn't so bad after all. It's just kind of floaty.
Hope you can do something about them.
Skyrim is famous for its dumb but often hilarious glitches. It's always a good giggle to watch the game have one of its special moments, but in virtual reality, when things feel a lot more real, well, it's often a much more peculiar sight. Seeing someone running on the spot like this in a normal game is a little bit silly, sure, but we've seen this kind of thing many times before. Seeing it in full-on 3D, though, transforms the experience into something even more bizarre. With the imagined solidity that VR brings, seeing a life-sized person do a weird jog on the spot sends you crashing headfirst into the uncanny valley. I mean, just imagine how weird it would be to stumble across someone doing this in the aisles of your local Lidl.
Other supermarket chains are available.
Oh, there once was a hero named Ragnar the Red who came riding to Whiterun from old Rorikstead.
I never spent much time in the taverns in vanilla Skyrim. I'd pop in every so often to pick up a side quest or two, but apart from that, I pretty much went where the action was. Taverns in VR are so different though. I mean, they're exactly the same, but the way you see them is different. They just feel much more real. I spent ages hanging out in the Bannered in Whiterun, just doing things that normally would be pretty damn boring. I mean, even just sitting on a chair can be mind-blowing in the right circumstances. I sat down for a couple of minutes to warm myself by the fire while I listened to the local bard belt out a couple of classic tunes, and I really felt like I was in a living, breathing tavern. Then I went on a date with a lady dark elf who was a little bit too into death for my liking.
Blade and shadow, silence and death. These are my arts. For a modest fee, I'll make great art for you.
It didn't really work out.
Just fists. No weapons, no magic, no crying. Let's go.
And then I even got into a pretty brutal fist fight with an angry Nord, something which feels extra immersive if you're using the move controllers and swinging your actual fists.
No!
I totally won as well, so unlucky, Uthgard. Not so cocky now, are ya?
Now that's what I call a punch.
If you've never fuss-rode Lydia off the cliffs of High Hrothgar, you've been playing Skyrim wrong. If you've never fuss-rode Lydia off the cliffs of High Hrothgar in PSVR, well, you've been playing life wrong. Again, VR's sense of scale and distance makes the sight of Lydia soaring through the air to her doom that much more spectacular, especially if you combine this with the move controllers to pretend you're pulling off an extremely powerful Hadouken. This next Fussrodar, though, this is one of the most incredible things I've ever seen in PSVR. Check out the height on that. Sorry, Lydia. Please forgive me. So there we go, those were 9 ways Skyrim VR blew my mind. But those were just a small selection of silly little things out of a whole game's worth of moments that really impressed me. The fact is, I nearly didn't bother with Skyrim VR, but I'm so glad I did. I really wasn't up for playing through the game for a third time, but the way the PSVR version brings the world to life is so amazing that it almost feels like you're playing a brand new game. Sure, the engine is showing its age quite a bit and the PSVR tech can be a little bit janky, but nevertheless, if you have a PSVR, I'd say this game is an essential purchase. If you don't have a PSVR, well, I'd say this, along with Resident Evil 7, would absolutely justify the purchase of one, because both of these games are truly breathtaking in VR. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe, and if you want to see more Skyrim VR gameplay, I've done a 4-hour Let's Play of the game, starting from the very beginning, and that's on screen for you to click on right now. So, get watching. Goodbye.
Those bears are making Miss Timber so angry.